A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Pale Blood Curse. The village of Ashenmoor had learned to time their morning routines around Blanche's suffering. Not because they cared, but because watching her stumble through the market square with her head down and her white hair catching the early light had become a grim form of entertainment, a reminder that even among shifters, there were those marked by the moon goddess as less than. Blanche knew this, had always known this, from the moment she'd been old enough to understand the whispers that followed her ghost-white skin and the violet eyes that marked her as cursed. 22 years of rejection had taught her to keep her gaze fixed on the dirt-packed ground, to make herself small, to survive by becoming invisible in plain sight. This morning should have been no different. She'd woken before dawn in the abandoned cabin she called home, her breath visible in the frigid air that seeped through cracks in the walls. The single threadbare blanket she owned had done little to ward off the cold, but she'd long since stopped expecting comfort. Comfort was for people the village actually wanted. She'd spent 3 hours baking bread in the communal ovens, payment for which would be a handful of copper coins from the baker. Just enough to buy grain for next week. Just enough to keep breathing for another 7 days. The market was already bustling when she arrived, merchants calling out their wares, children darting between stalls, normal people living normal lives. Blanche kept to the edges, clutching the basket of bread against her chest as she made her way toward the baker's stall. "There she is," someone muttered. "The cursed one." Blanche's steps didn't falter. She'd heard worse. "My daughter got sick last week." Another voice rose. "Right after that thing walked past our house. Bad luck follows her everywhere. Unnatural creature." The words washed over her, familiar as breathing. She'd learned years ago that defending herself only made things worse. The villagers needed someone to blame for their troubles, and Blanche, with her albino skin and eyes the color of midnight violets, made an easy target. She reached the baker's stall and set the basket down carefully. The man, a weathered shifter with gray in his beard, counted the loaves without meeting her eyes. 6 coppers, he grunted, dropping the coins into her palm without touching her skin. Blanche pocketed them quickly and turned to leave. If she moved fast, she could make it back to her cabin before anyone decided today would be the day for something worse than words. She should have known better than to hope. Well, a voice drawled behind her. "If it isn't the ghost." Blanche's blood turned to ice. Jorah, the ferryman's son, built solid as his father's anvil and twice as cruel. He'd tormented her since childhood, graduated from pulling her hair to far worse as they'd grown. The scars on her arms from Wolfsbane burns were his handiwork, delivered when she'd been too young to know better than to fight back. "Please," she whispered, hating how weak her voice sounded. "I don't want trouble." "Hear that, boys?" Jorah laughed, and Blanche realized he wasn't alone. 6 other young men had gathered behind him, all wearing the same hungry expression. "She doesn't want trouble." The market square had gone quiet. Blanche saw people turning away, pretending not to notice. No one would help her. They never did. "We've been talking," Jorah continued, moving closer. Blanche backed up until her spine hit a wall. "About how you're not really one of us. Can't even shift, can you? So what are you?" "Omega," Blanche breathed. "I'm Omega, I swear. The Wolfsbane works on me. You've seen it." "Have we?" Jorah pulled something from his pocket. A small cloth pouch. Blanche's heart stopped when she recognized the dark powder visible through the fabric. "Because I think you're lying. I think you're something worse. Something that needs to be tested." "No." Blanche tried to run, but hands grabbed her arms, yanking her back. "Please, no. Not again." They dragged her to the center of the square, where everyone could see. Where everyone would watch and do nothing, just like always. Jorah opened the pouch, and the acrid smell of concentrated wolfsbane made Blanche's eyes water. "Let's see what happens when we give the demon a proper dose," Jorah announced to the crowd. "Maybe it'll finally show us what it really is." He threw the powder directly into Blanche's face. The effect was immediate and devastating. Wolfsbane was poison to all shifters, but concentrated like this, it felt like liquid fire spreading through her veins. Blanche's knees buckled and she hit the ground hard. unable even to scream as her body convulsed. Blood trickled from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes. Her violet irises seemed to glow brighter for a moment before dimming as fever seized her. Through the haze of agony, she heard laughter, cheering. Someone kicked dirt onto her shaking form. "Not so cursed now, are you?" Jorah crowed. Blanche's vision tunneled. This was it. This was how she would die, choking on Wolfsbane in a market square while villagers celebrated. No one would mourn her. They'd probably throw a festival. She closed her eyes and waited for darkness. Instead, she felt the air change. It started as a shift in pressure, subtle as a distant storm. Then came the scent, strong, masculine, undeniably alpha, cutting through even the Wolfsbane's stench. Blanche forced her eyes open and saw the crowd parting, people falling to their knees without seeming to realize they were doing it. 2 men on horseback had entered the square. The one in front was the most striking man Blanche had ever seen, even through her pain-blurred vision. Tall in the saddle, with black hair that fell to his shoulders and a short, well-kept beard framing a face carved from granite and authority. His eyes were storm gray and currently blazing with fury. Alpha King, Blanche's fevered mind supplied. That's the Alpha King. Caius Winterborn, who ruled every pack in the kingdom, sat perfectly still on his black destrier, taking in the scene before him. His companion, a red-haired man with kind eyes, looked horrified. "Your Majesty," someone stammered. "We didn't expect—" Silence. The Alpha King's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute command. Every voice in the square cut off mid-sentence. Caius dismounted in a single fluid motion. His boots made no sound on the packed earth as he walked toward where Blanche lay trembling. Jorah and his friends had frozen, still holding the empty Wolfsbane pouch. The Alpha King stopped directly in front of Jorah. He was taller by a full head, and the power radiating from him made the air shimmer. "What?" Caius asked, each word precise as a blade. "Do you think you're doing?" "She's cursed, Your Majesty," Jorah stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. "We were just testing to see if she's really one of us." "Testing." Caius's eyes flickered to the Wolfsbane pouch, then to Blanche's convulsing form. "You threw concentrated Wolfsbane on an Omega to test her. In a public square. For entertainment. She's not right," someone in the crowd ventured. "Her appearance—" "Kneel." The command rolled across the square with the force of an Alpha King's full power. Every shifter present, from the oldest merchant to the smallest child, dropped to their knees instantly. Jorah's face went white as his body betrayed him, slamming down onto the cobblestones hard enough to bruise. Caius ignored them all. He moved to Blanche's side and crouched down, one large hand hovering over her face as if afraid she might shatter at his touch. Up close, she could see the silver threading through his black hair, the scar on his chin, the barely controlled rage burning in his storm-gray eyes. "Omega," he murmured. "Can you hear me?" Blanche tried to speak, but blood bubbled from her lips instead. Her body was shutting down, overwhelmed by the poison. Something shifted in the Alpha King's expression. Without warning, he scooped Blanche into his arms as carefully as if she were made of glass. She weighed almost nothing, wasted from years of near starvation, but he held her as if she were precious. For the first time in her life, Blanche felt safe. Her eyes met his, violet to gray, and she saw him go very still. His pupils dilated slightly, and she felt something pass between them that she couldn't name. Recognition, perhaps. Or destiny. Then her eyes rolled back and consciousness fled. The last thing she heard was the Alpha King's voice, cold as winter frost, addressing the red-haired man still on horseback. "Tobias, arrest them all, especially that one." A pause. "We'll be holding trials for crimes against an Omega, capital crimes." The market square erupted into protests and pleas for mercy, but Blanche heard none of it. She was already gone, falling into fever dreams where violet eyes glowed in darkness, and a voice like distant thunder promised that no one would ever hurt her again. When Caius Winterborn looked down at the broken Omega in his arms, he felt his wolf surge forward with an intensity that shocked him. "Mine!" the beast snarled. "Ours!" Protect. He'd been Alpha King for 8 years. felt the mate bond pull before, faint and distant, toward women who'd proven incompatible. But this was different. This felt like recognition on a soul-deep level that defied explanation. The girl's white hair spilled over his arm, catching the sunlight. Her violet eyes, now closed, had burned themselves into his memory. But more than her unusual appearance, it was her scent that called to him. Beneath the Wolfsbane's poison, she smelled of snow and starlight, and something ancient he couldn't quite place. Caius had come to Ashenmoor on routine border inspection. He'd planned to be gone by noon. Instead, he found himself holding a dying Omega, while his wolf howled for blood and justice in equal measure. "Tobias," he called, his voice still carrying that dangerous edge. "Clear the road. We ride for the castle. Now." "The trials, Your Majesty?" "Can wait." Caius looked down at Blanche's fever-flushed face. "She can't." He remounted his horse with preternatural grace, still cradling the Omega against his chest. She fit there perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her shallow breaths warm against his throat. His wolf purred with satisfaction. Finally, having her close. As they galloped toward the castle that loomed over Ashenmoor, Caius allowed himself one coherent thought about what had just happened. Fate had terrible timing, but impeccable taste. Chapter 2. Within stone walls, Blanche woke 3 days later to softness she'd never known existed. The bed beneath her felt like sleeping on clouds, which made no sense because clouds weren't real things you could touch. But the mattress cradled her body with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes before she'd even opened them. Sheets that didn't scratch against her skin. Blankets that actually provided warmth. A pillow that smelled of lavender instead of mildew and despair. For a beautiful, disorienting moment, she thought she'd died and somehow ended up somewhere better than she deserved. Then pain lanced through her skull, sharp and vicious, and she remembered. The market, Jorah, Wolfsbane, the Alpha King. Blanche's eyes flew open, and she immediately regretted it, as bright afternoon light stabbed into her brain. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of her surroundings through the lingering fog of fever and confusion. This was not her cabin. This was not anywhere she'd ever been. Stone walls rose around her, fitted so perfectly that barely any gaps showed between the massive blocks. Tapestries hung from iron brackets, depicting battles and hunts in threads of gold and crimson. A fireplace large enough to stand in dominated one wall, flames crackling cheerfully behind an ornate iron screen. Windows with actual glass, not just shutters, let in streams of sunlight that turned the dust motes into dancing sprites. She was in the castle. The Alpha King's castle. Terror seized her throat. Why was she here? What did he want with her? Powerful people didn't help cursed Omegas out of kindness. There had to be a price, and Blanche had nothing left to pay except her life. "Easy now," a voice said gently. "You're safe, child. Try not to move too quickly." Blanche's head whipped toward the sound, then immediately regretted it as nausea rolled through her. An elderly woman sat in a chair beside the bed, setting down what looked like needlework. She had gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, kind eyes the color of hazelnuts, and the wrinkled face of someone who smiled often. The woman rose and moved to a table, pouring water from a ceramic pitcher into a cup. She brought it to Blanche with steady hands. "Drink slowly," she instructed. "Your body's been through an ordeal. Wolfsbane poisoning isn't something to take lightly, especially in such concentration." Blanche took the cup with trembling hands and sipped. The water was cool and clean, nothing like the brackish stuff from the well near her cabin. She drank it all, then accepted a second cup when the woman offered. "Where am I?" Blanche asked, though she already knew. "Why am I here?" "The Alpha King's personal wing of the castle," the woman replied, settling back into her chair. "I'm Meredith, the castle healer. His Majesty brought you here 3 days ago after finding you in Ashenmoor's Market Square. You've been in and out of consciousness since then, mostly fever dreams from what I could tell. 3 days. Blanche had lost 3 entire days. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would he bring me here? I'm nobody. I'm nothing. The cursed one from Ashenmoor who can't even shift properly." Meredith's expression softened with something that looked dangerously close to pity. Blanche hated pity almost as much as she hated cruelty. At least cruelty was honest. You're an Omega who was tortured with Wolfsbane in broad daylight while an entire village watched, Meredith said firmly. That's not nothing. That's a crime. His Majesty takes crimes against pack members very seriously, regardless of rank. I'm not pack, Blanche protested weakly. Ashenmore made that perfectly clear. You're pack now. The healer's voice carried absolute certainty. The Alpha King declared it himself. You're under his personal protection, which means you're under the protection of the crown. Anyone who harms you harms him directly. The words made no sense. Why would the most powerful shifter in the kingdom care about a broken Omega from a village that had spent 22 years trying to destroy her? Before Blanche could ask, the door opened and a man entered. Not the Alpha King, but someone nearly as intimidating in a different way. Red hair, green eyes, broad shoulders, and an easy confidence that spoke of someone comfortable with authority. She's awake, he said to Meredith, sounding pleased. Then to Blanche. I'm Tobias, Beta to His Majesty. How are you feeling? Confused, Blanche admitted. And scared. And I don't understand what's happening. Tobias pulled another chair closer to the bed and sat, making himself less threatening through posture alone. It was a calculated move, Blanche realized. Everything about this man was calculated, from his casual tone to his non-threatening body language. He wanted her to feel safe. She didn't. Safety was a lie people told before they hurt you. I'm going to ask you some questions, Tobias said. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. But it would help us understand your situation better. My situation. Blanche laughed, and it came out bitter. My situation is that I'm cursed. Born wrong. An Omega who can't shift like normal people. The village has hated me since I was old enough to understand words. Is that the kind of information you need? Actually, yes. Tobias leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your shifting. Or lack thereof. When was your first transformation supposed to happen? Blanche pulled the blankets higher, suddenly cold despite the warm room. At puberty, like everyone else. I was 13 when other Omega my age started shifting for the first time. I tried. Moon goddess, I tried so hard. But nothing ever happened. My body just stayed human, useless, and weak. Yet Wolfsbane affects you, Meredith interjected. I saw the burns on your arms when I treated you. Old scars from previous exposures. If you weren't Omega, the poison wouldn't touch you at all. I know, that's what makes it worse. I'm Omega enough to be weak, but not Omega enough to be useful. Blanche met Tobias's eyes directly for the first time. The village called me cursed, an abomination, something that shouldn't exist. They weren't entirely wrong. Who told you that? Tobias asked, his voice deceptively mild. Everyone. The word came out flat. My parents died when I was 7. Fever took them both within a week. After that, the village elders tried to decide what to do with me. Some wanted to send me away to an orphanage in the capital. Others wanted to execute me as a mercy, since I'd never be able to contribute to pack strength. Meredith made a small, distressed sound. Tobias's expression went carefully neutral. They settled on letting me live in an abandoned cabin on the edge of the village. Blanche continued, the words flowing now that she'd started. 22 years of silence breaking open all at once. I could stay as long as I earned my keep and didn't cause trouble. So I worked. Cleaning, cooking, whatever tasks no one else wanted. It wasn't much, but it was survival. And Jorah? Tobias asked. The ferryman's son. How long has he been tormenting you? Blanche flinched at the name. Since we were children. He was always bigger, always stronger. The first time he burned me with Wolfsbane, I was 10. He said he wanted to see if I'd finally shift from the pain. I didn't. I just screamed and cried while he laughed. Did anyone stop him? Why would they? Blanche's voice cracked. I was the cursed one. He was the future ferryman, strong and useful to the pack. Who do you think the village would choose to protect? Silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. Meredith had tears in her eyes. Tobias looked like he wanted to break something, preferably Jorah's face. There's something you should know, Tobias said finally. His Majesty ordered immediate trials for everyone involved in the Market Square incident. Jorah and 6 others who participated directly. The trials were concluded yesterday. Blanche's heart stuttered. Concluded? Capital punishment was deemed excessive given this was their first offense against Crown law, but they've been sentenced to 20 years of hard labor in the silver mines. All 7 of them. They'll spend the rest of their useful lives underground, mining the very substance they used to torture you. The information hit Blanche like a physical blow. Jorah, who'd made her life a waking nightmare since childhood, was gone. Punished. Actually punished for what he'd done to her. She should have felt victorious, vindicated. Something other than this strange, hollow emptiness in her chest. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I'm nothing. Why would the Alpha King care? Why would he go to such lengths for someone like me?" Tobias and Meredith exchanged a glance that Blanche couldn't interpret. "You'll have to ask His Majesty that yourself," Tobias said carefully. "But know this, Blanche. You're under the protection of the Crown now. No one will harm you again. Not while the Alpha King draws breath." "Speaking of which," Meredith interjected, standing and smoothing her apron, "I should inform His Majesty that you've woken. He left explicit orders to be notified immediately." "No," Blanche said quickly, panic rising. "Please, I'm not ready. I don't know what to say to him. I don't even know why I'm here. What if he changes his mind? What if he realizes I'm not worth the trouble and sends me back?" "Then you'll deal with that when it happens," Tobias said, not unkindly. "But I don't think you need to worry. His Majesty doesn't make decisions lightly, and he certainly doesn't change his mind on a whim." Meredith left anyway, ignoring Blanche's weak protests, which left her alone with Tobias and her spiraling thoughts. "I have a question," Blanche said suddenly, "about my cabin, my belongings. Not that there's much worth salvaging, but would you like us to send guards to retrieve anything?" Tobias offered. "Personal items, mementos? Anything that might make this transition easier?" Blanche thought of her cabin with its leaking roof and rotting floorboards, the single threadbare blanket, the chipped wooden bowl she ate from, the rusted knife that barely cut bread anymore, 22 years of accumulated poverty and pain, all contained in 4 crumbling walls. "No," she said finally, and felt something release in her chest. "There's nothing there worth keeping. That life is over." If Tobias found her words strange, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and said, "As you wish." They sat in companionable silence for a while, Blanche processing everything she'd learned while Tobias waited patiently. Finally, she worked up the courage to ask the question that had been gnawing at her since she woke. The people in Ashenmoor, the villagers who watched and did nothing while Jorah hurt me, what happens to them? "They're living with their choices," Tobias said quietly. After His Majesty pronounced judgment on the perpetrators, he made it very clear that the entire village's inaction made them complicit. Fear of the Alpha King runs deep in Ashenmoor now. They know they were one hair's breadth from losing everything. Blanche felt that hollow emptiness again. She should have felt satisfied by their fear. Instead, she just felt tired. "They were afraid of me," she said. "My whole life, they were afraid of what I represented. A shifter who couldn't shift. Something broken in the natural order. They convinced themselves I was cursed, dangerous, responsible for their misfortunes. Fear makes people cruel. Does understanding them make it hurt less?" Tobias asked. "No." Blanche met his eyes. "But maybe it makes forgiveness possible. Eventually. Not now, but someday." Before Tobias could respond, the door opened again, and Meredith returned, looking flustered. Behind her stood the Alpha King himself. Blanche's breath caught in her throat. He looked different in proper light, without fever and poison clouding her vision. Still imposing, still powerful beyond measure, but there was something in his storm-gray eyes that she hadn't expected. Concern. Real, genuine concern for her well-being. "Leave us," Kaya said quietly. It wasn't a command exactly, but Tobias and Meredith departed immediately anyway, closing the door behind them. The Alpha King moved closer to the bed, and Blanche fought the urge to pull the blankets over her head like a child hiding from monsters. Except this particular monster had saved her life, and she didn't know how to reconcile that with everything she'd learned about powerful people. "You're awake," he said, and his voice was softer than she remembered. "How do you feel?" "Confused," Blanche admitted, because what else was there to say? Your Majesty, Caius. He pulled the chair Tobias had vacated closer and sat, making himself less towering, though no less powerful. When we're alone, you may call me Caius. That seemed wildly inappropriate. But Blanche wasn't about to argue with the Alpha King about proper forms of address. I don't understand why I'm here, she said instead. Why you helped me. Why you punished Jorah and the others. I'm nobody, just a cursed Omega from a village that wishes I'd never been born. Caius's expression darkened slightly. You're Omega. That alone makes you valuable, regardless of what ignorant villagers believe. But more than that, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. When I saw you in that market square, being tortured for entertainment, while an entire community watched and did nothing, something in me demanded action. My wolf recognized your pain, your isolation, and I will not tolerate such cruelty in my kingdom. So this is about justice, Blanche said slowly. About making an example of Ashenmoor. This is about protecting one of my own. Caius leaned forward slightly. Your pack now, Blanche. My pack, under my direct protection, which means you stay here, in the castle, until we figure out what comes next. What comes next? The words came out strangled. I can't stay here. I don't belong in a place like this. I'm just broken Omega who can't even shift. I'll be a burden, an embarrassment to your court. You'll be whatever you choose to be. Caius's voice carried absolute certainty. Starting with safe. No one will hurt you here. No one will call you cursed or treat you as less than you are. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Blanche stared at him, searching for the lie, the hidden price, the inevitable betrayal. But all she found in those storm-gray eyes was sincerity, and something deeper that she couldn't name. For the first time in her life, Blanche felt the dangerous stirring of hope, and she had no idea if that would save her or destroy her completely. Chapter 3. Ancient Blood. The days following Blanche's awakening settled into an uneasy rhythm. She remained confined to her luxurious prison, exploring the boundaries of her chamber while trying to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath her feet. Meredith visited twice daily with meals and gentle conversation. Tobias checked in periodically with updates about castle life, but it was Caius's visits that unsettled her most. The Alpha King came every evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He never stayed long, never pushed for conversation she wasn't ready to give. Sometimes he simply sat in the chair by the fireplace and worked through correspondence while she pretended to read books from the chamber's small library. Other times, he asked careful questions about her life, her thoughts, her dreams, before Ashenmoor had crushed them all. Blanche didn't understand his interest, didn't trust it, but she found herself looking forward to those quiet evenings, more than she cared to admit. On the 5th day, Caius arrived with company. Blanche, he said, his deep voice carrying that subtle command she'd come to recognize. I'd like you to meet 2 people who may be able to help us understand your condition better. The woman who entered first had kind eyes and wore healer's robes similar to Meredith's. She moved with the confidence of someone comfortable with authority, but her smile held genuine warmth. I've already met her, Blanche said, recognizing Meredith immediately. You've been caring for me all week? Indeed, Meredith agreed, settling into a chair. But today, I'm here in a different capacity. His Majesty has asked me to conduct some specialized tests, with your permission, of course. The man who followed looked nothing like a warrior. Thin and scholarly, he carried himself with the perpetual stoop of someone who spent too much time hunched over books. Ink stained his fingers, and he wore spectacles that caught the firelight as he peered at Blanche with open curiosity. This is Everard, Caius introduced. He's the kingdom's foremost scholar on shifter lineages and bloodline histories. If anyone can explain why you haven't been able to transform, it's him. Your Majesty flatters me, Everard said, his voice carrying the refined tones of educated nobility. Though I confess, I've been fascinated by your case since His Majesty described it to me. An Omega who cannot shift but responds to Wolfsbane as any shifter would. Most intriguing. Blanche found herself pulled between fear and hope. You think there's an explanation? Something that might help me? I think there's always an explanation, Everard replied, pulling a worn leather journal from his satchel. The question is whether we can uncover it before prejudice and superstition obscure the truth entirely. For the next hour, they subjected Blanche to a battery of tests. Meredith drew blood, examined her eyes and teeth, pressed her fingers against points along Blanche's spine that made her shiver. Everard took extensive notes, occasionally asking questions about her family history, her childhood, any memories that stood out as unusual. Your parents, Everard said, tapping his quill against his journal. Tell me about them. Their names, their ranks, anything you remember. Blanche closed her eyes, pulling up memories she'd tried to bury. My mother was Selina. She worked as a seamstress for the village. I remember her hands always smelled like lavender from the sachets she made. My father was Godwin, a carpenter. Strong, quiet. He built things. Their shifter status, both Omega, Blanche said. Low-ranking but functional. They could transform normally, hunt with the pack when needed. Nothing special about them. Everard and Meredith exchanged a glance that made Blanche's stomach clench. What? She demanded. What is it? It's what I suspected, Everard murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to Caius, who'd been watching silently from his position by the window. Your Majesty, I need access to the restricted archives, the sealed sections from before your grandfather's reign. Caius's expression darkened. Those records are sealed for a reason, Everard, and that reason may be exactly why this young woman has suffered her entire life, Everard shot back, displaying a boldness that surprised Blanche. If I'm right about what she is, then we need those records. All of them. What am I? Blanche whispered, fear creeping up her spine. Please, just tell me. Meredith moved to sit beside her, taking Blanche's hands in her weathered ones. We need to conduct one more test first. A ritual test, using symbols that haven't been employed in common practice for generations. From her bag, Meredith produced a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in silk, lay 3 objects. A silver pendant engraved with a crescent moon, a vial of dark liquid that smelled of earth and iron, and a piece of parchment covered in symbols Blanche didn't recognize. These are ancient, Meredith explained, from a time when shifter magic was understood differently, when bloodlines carried gifts that went beyond simple transformation. She arranged the objects in a triangle on the small table beside Blanche's bed, then uncorked the vial. The liquid inside gleamed like liquid midnight. Give me your hand, Meredith instructed. Blanche obeyed, watching as the healer used a small knife to prick her finger. 3 drops of blood fell onto the parchment, spreading across the strange symbols and patterns that defied gravity. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blood began to glow. Not red, as blood should glow if it glowed at all, but violet, the exact shade of Blanche's eyes. The light intensified, spreading from the parchment to the pendant, which began to hum with a frequency that made Blanche's teeth ache. The symbols seemed to move, rearranging themselves into new configurations that hurt to look at directly. Impossible, Everard breathed, his face going pale. The records spoke of this, but I thought it was legend. Myth. Not something that could actually exist in the modern age. What's happening? Blanche demanded, pulling her hand back. The violet glow faded immediately, leaving only normal blood on the parchment. What did you just do to me? Caius crossed the room in 3 long strides, his presence suddenly protective rather than merely observational. Explain. Now. Everard sank into a chair as if his legs had given out. Your Majesty, this woman is not simply an Omega who cannot transform. She's something far rarer, far more significant. He looked at Blanche with something approaching reverence. You're what the ancient text called an Omega of the Void Moon. The phrase meant nothing to Blanche, but it clearly meant something to Caius. His entire body went rigid, and when he spoke, his voice carried a dangerous edge. Those are extinct. They were hunted to extinction centuries ago. Apparently not, Meredith said quietly. The bloodline survived, hidden among common Omegas, diluted over generations until the gifts lay dormant, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest. Someone needs to explain what you're talking about, Blanche interrupted, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. In words I can actually understand. Everard took a steadying breath. In the ancient times, before the current pack structure was established, there existed shifters with abilities that went beyond transformation. Void Moon Omegas were among the most powerful. They could manipulate the fundamental bonds between shifters, could sense and even alter mate connections. They could create new packs independent of alpha authority, could heal or harm with a touch. They were dangerous, Caius added, his tone carefully neutral. To the established order, to alpha supremacy, to the entire hierarchical structure that keeps our society stable. So they were eliminated, Blanche finished, understanding dawning cold and terrible, systematically hunted and killed because they threatened those in power. Yes, Everard confirmed. But the records I've studied mention one crucial detail. The gifts of the Void Moon Omegas were sealed at birth through ancient magic. The seals prevented transformation and kept the abilities dormant, making the children appear ordinary. But the seals can be broken under specific circumstances. Blanche's throat went dry. What circumstances? The acceptance of a true mate bond, Meredith said gently. Love freely given, not forced or coerced. Safety and belonging after a lifetime of rejection. The seal breaks when the Omega finally feels worthy of the power she was born to wield. The implications crashed over Blanche like a wave. She looked at Caius, saw understanding, and something else flickering in his storm-gray eyes. "There's more you're not telling me," she said. "I can see it in your faces. What else did your tests reveal?" "References to something called the Great Purge," Everard admitted reluctantly. An event approximately 300 years ago when the last known concentration of Void Moon Omegas were discovered and destroyed. But many of the records about this event were deliberately destroyed or heavily censored. By royal decree. "By whose decree?" Blanche demanded, though she thought she already knew the answer. "The first Winterborn Alpha King," Caius said flatly. "My ancestor. The one who consolidated pack territories under crown authority and established the modern system of governance." The room fell silent, heavy with implications. The Alpha King's own bloodline had built its power on the genocide of people like Blanche, and now here she sat, in his castle, under his protection, possibly the last surviving member of a murdered bloodline. "I need you all to leave," Blanche said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please. I need to think." Meredith squeezed her hand once before gathering her testing materials. Everard hesitated, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but Caius's sharp gesture sent him scurrying toward the door. The Alpha King lingered longest. "I won't apologize for what my ancestor did," he said quietly. "I had no part in those decisions. And the sins of the past don't define the present. But I will promise you this, Blanche. Whatever you are, whatever powers may or may not be sealed inside you, you're safe here. From everyone. Including me." "Why?" The question burst from her throat. "Why do you care? Is it guilt? Responsibility? Or do you see me as a threat that needs to be controlled?" Caius's expression shifted into something raw and honest. "I see you as a person who's been dealt a terrible hand by fate and prejudice. Someone strong enough to survive when everyone wanted you to break. And yes, my wolf recognizes something in you that I can't fully explain yet. But whatever this is between us, it's real. Not manipulation. Not obligation." He left before Blanche could form a response, closing the door with careful gentleness. Alone again, Blanche moved to the window and stared out at the darkening kingdom. Somewhere beyond these walls lived people who would want her dead if they learned what she was. A bloodline thought extinct, carrying gifts that had once threatened the entire foundation of shifter society. And the man who'd saved her life, who was showing her kindness she'd never known, descended from the very people who'd tried to exterminate her kind. Blanche pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wondered if fate had a sense of humor or simply enjoyed cruelty in elaborate forms. Either way, her life would never be simple again. The corridor outside Blanche's chambers was quiet when the priest arrived. He didn't announce himself. Sanctimony rarely needed permission. "Child," Father Oswin intoned, fingers brushing the silver of his rosary as though it were a weapon. "Sin travels like rot. It takes root in the bones of those who invite it." Blanche kept her hands folded to hide the tremor. If you came to bless the walls, you can do it without speaking to me. His eyes lingered on her hair, on the ghost white that had always made people cruel. I came to warn the king. Wolves who cannot change are mistakes. Mistakes should be corrected, before they spread. Get away from her. Tobias's voice carried from the far end of the hall, flat and absolute. 2 guards fell in at his shoulders. You will leave the royal wing now, father. The priest's smile thinned. You put the whole keep in danger. His gaze slithered back to Blanche. And one day, girl, the goddess will ask who paid the price. Oswin turned on his heel, robes whispering. He didn't come back. Not to the royal wing, not while guards watched the doors, and Tobias watched the guards. Chapter 4. Shadows of Conspiracy. The training courtyard was deserted at dawn, which suited Blanche perfectly. She'd spent 3 weeks in the castle now, long enough to learn its rhythms and hidden spaces, long enough to understand that Caius's protection meant she was watched constantly, but carefully, guards positioned at discreet distances, servants who reported her movements, all done under the pretense of keeping her safe. Blanche suspected it was equal parts protection and precaution. She was, after all, the first living void moon Omega anyone had seen in 3 centuries, a walking contradiction of everything the modern pack system claimed to have resolved. You're improving. Caius's voice came from behind her, making her spin around with the practice sword still raised. He stood in the archway, dressed in simple training leathers that somehow made him look more dangerous than his formal court attire. Your footwork is cleaner. Less hesitation in your strikes. Again, Caius said. But this time breathe like you're answering a command, slow and all the way down. Blanche raised the practice blade. The forms were muscle and breath now. Fear lived elsewhere. On the 4th pass, something shivered under her skin. Not a shift, not fully, but a pressure like a door unlatching in a locked house. Her nails lengthened to points, and then retreated. For a heartbeat, her pupils thinned, violet gone star-bright, and the scent of iron and snow flooded her mouth. She staggered. Caius was there before she fell, steady hands at her elbows, eyes searching. That, he murmured, voice low with a wolf's satisfaction, wasn't nothing. Meredith arrived breathless, drawn by the guard's alarm. The healer pressed fingers to Blanche's pulse, then to the notches along her spine. Transient expression, she said at last, relief softening the lines of her face. Claws. Eyes. A body remembering a language it was forbidden to speak. Blanche swallowed. It hurt, but it felt true. We go slow, Caius said, the command gentled into promise. No forcing doors. You open them, on your terms. Heat crept up Blanche's neck. She'd thought she was alone, had been practicing the combat forms he'd been teaching her for the past 2 weeks. Basic defense, he'd called it. Tools to protect yourself when words and status aren't sufficient. I couldn't sleep, she admitted, lowering the wooden blade. Too many thoughts. About your nature? He moved into the courtyard properly, picking up a practice sword of his own. Or about what Everard's been discovering in the restricted archives. Both. Blanche watched him circle her, noting the predatory grace in his movements. 3 weeks of proximity had taught her to read his moods through body language. Right now, he was tense. Something had happened. You look worried. What's wrong? Caius lunged without warning, and Blanche barely got her sword up in time to deflect. The impact jarred her arms, reminding her just how much stronger he was. But she recovered quickly, falling into the defensive patterns they'd practiced. Lady Genevieve Harcourt arrived last night, Caius said between strikes. Officially, she's here for a courtesy visit to discuss trade agreements between her pack lands and the crown. Unofficially, she's been lobbying for a marriage alliance for the past 2 years. Blanche stumbled, and Caius pulled his next strike. Marriage? To you? She's from a powerful pack. Good bloodlines, significant resources, politically well-connected. His tone was absolutely neutral, which somehow made it worse. By all traditional measures, she'd make an excellent Luna. Something cold and sharp twisted in Blanche's chest. She attacked with more force than technique, driving Caius back several steps before he caught her blade with his own. Then why haven't you accepted? The question came out more aggressive than she'd intended. Caius held her gaze, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Practiced swords crossed between their bodies, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his dark hair. Because, he said quietly, I'm waiting to see if there's a better option. Before Blanche could process that statement, footsteps echoed across the courtyard. Tobias appeared, looking grim. Your Majesty, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Caius stepped back, lowering his sword. What kind of situation? The kind involving missing correspondence, forged seals, and at least 3 pact territories that shouldn't be communicating with each other, but apparently are. Tobias's expression darkened. Someone's been using crown messengers to coordinate something. Discreetly. Show me. Caius handed his practice sword to a nearby weapons rack, then glanced back at Blanche. We'll continue this later. Both the training and the conversation. She watched them leave, heart still racing from more than just physical exertion. A marriage alliance. Of course there would be marriage alliances. Caius was the Alpha King. He needed a Luna. Needed heirs. Needed all the political machinery that came with absolute power. And Blanche was a broken Omega who couldn't even shift, whose very existence threatened the foundation of the system Caius ruled. She practiced for another hour, working through her frustration with increasingly aggressive forms. By the time she finally returned to her chambers, sweat-soaked and exhausted, she found Meredith waiting with clean clothes and concerned eyes. You push yourself too hard, child, the healer chided gently. Not hard enough, Blanche muttered, accepting the towel Meredith offered. I'm still weak compared to everyone else here. One good hit, and I'd be done. Physical strength isn't the only kind that matters. Meredith helped her out of the practice leathers, tisking at the bruises already forming on Blanche's arms. His Majesty is teaching you to defend yourself, which is wise. But don't mistake combat prowess for true power. Blanche sank into the chair while Meredith prepared a bath. What do you know about Lady Genevieve? The healer's hand stilled for just a moment. Why do you ask? Because Caius mentioned she's here. Because apparently she wants to marry him. Because I need to understand the court politics if I'm going to survive here. Meredith finished preparing the bath before speaking. Lady Genevieve is beautiful, well-educated, and comes from one of the oldest pack families in the kingdom. She's also ambitious, calculating, and not particularly known for her compassion toward those she considers beneath her station. So she'd hate me on sight, Blanche concluded. Most likely. Meredith helped Blanche into the steaming water, then settled on a nearby stool. But hatred from people like Genevieve is often less dangerous than their false friendship. At least you know where you stand with open enemies. The words proved prophetic 3 hours later. Blanche had been exploring the castle gardens, enjoying the late afternoon sun and the relative privacy of the rose arbor, when she heard voices approaching. She started to retreat, wanting to avoid whatever noble visitors might be touring the grounds, but froze when she recognized Caius's voice. Your concern is noted, Lady Genevieve, but my decisions regarding pack security are not subject to your approval. I'm merely suggesting, Your Majesty, that recent events have made you vulnerable to manipulation. A woman's voice, honeyed and refined. Allowing unknown elements into your inner circle during such turbulent times seems unwise. Blanche pressed herself against the arbor wall, hidden by climbing roses. Unknown elements? Caius's tone had gone dangerously soft. Be specific, my lady. The Omega you rescued from Ashenmoor. Genevieve's voice dripped false concern. I understand your compassion, truly. But harboring a cursed creature, one that even her own village rejected. The other packs are talking, Your Majesty. They question your judgment. My judgment is not theirs to question. Of course not. But perception matters in politics, and the perception of an Alpha King keeping a deformed Omega as a pet, Genevieve let the implication hang. It reflects poorly on the crown's strength. Blanche's hands clenched into fists. Pet, deformed, cursed. All the words that had haunted her entire life, now spoken by a woman who'd never met her. Lady Genevieve. Caius's voice had gone arctic. I will say this once, and you would do well to remember it. That Omega is under my personal protection. Any insult toward her is an insult toward me. Any threat against her will be treated as treason. Am I perfectly clear? A pause, Then, in a much more subdued tone, "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. See that you don't." Footsteps retreated. This conversation is concluded. Blanche waited until silence fell before emerging from her hiding spot. Her legs felt shaky, emotions warring between vindication at Caius's defense and shame at being called a pet in the first place. She shouldn't have been surprised when she nearly collided with Lady Genevieve herself rounding a corner of the garden path. The woman was stunning. Golden hair arranged in intricate braids, blue eyes that missed nothing, wearing a gown that probably cost more than Blanche's entire former village earned in a year. When those calculating eyes fixed on Blanche, recognition flared immediately. "You must be the famous rescue project," Genevieve said sweetly. "How delightful to finally meet you." Blanche straightened her spine, refusing to be cowed. "Lady Genevieve, I've heard much about you. All terrible, I hope." Genevieve's smile never reached her eyes. She circled Blanche slowly, assessing. "My, you are a curious thing, aren't you? Those eyes, that skin. I can see why the Alpha King finds you fascinating, like a rare butterfly pinned to a board for study." "I'm not anyone's specimen," Blanche said quietly. "Aren't you?" Genevieve stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Blanche could smell expensive perfume. "Tell me, little ghost, do you truly believe His Majesty's interest in you is personal? Or do you think perhaps there's something else at play? Some strategic value to claiming the last of an extinct bloodline?" The words hit harder than any physical blow, because they echoed Blanche's own deepest fears. "I don't expect someone like you to understand," Blanche managed. "Someone like me?" Genevieve laughed, the sound musical and cruel. "Oh, child, I understand perfectly. I understand that you're playing a game you're utterly unequipped for. Court politics aren't kind to broken little omegas who can't even shift. And while the Alpha King may protect you now, how long before his patience wears thin? How long before you become a liability instead of a curiosity? That's enough." Tobias's voice cut across the garden, firm and commanding. He'd approached without either of them noticing. "Lady Genevieve, I believe your escort is waiting to show you to the East Wing." Genevieve's mask of politeness slid back into place. "Of course. It was lovely meeting you, Blanche. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." She glided away, leaving Blanche and Tobias alone in the garden. "Don't let her get to you," Tobias said gently. "She's skilled at finding people's weak points and exploiting them." "What if she's right?" Blanche whispered. "What if I am just a political curiosity? What if Caius is only protecting me because of what I represent, not who I am?" Tobias was quiet for a long moment. "Can I share something with you? Something I've never told anyone?" Blanche nodded. "I've known Caius since we were children. Trained with him, fought beside him. Watched him grow into his role as Alpha King, and I've never once seen him lose control over anything. Anyone." Tobias's green eyes were serious. "Until you. When he brought you back from Ashenmoor, covered in Wolfsbane burns and barely breathing. His wolf nearly took over. I've never seen him that close to shifting involuntarily. That's not political strategy, Blanche. That's instinct." Before Blanche could respond, a servant rushed into the garden, face pale with urgency. "Beta Tobias, we need you immediately. There's been an incident in the kitchens. Someone tried to poison one of the food deliveries meant for Miss Blanche's chambers." The world tilted sideways. Someone had tried to poison her. Again. Tobias's expression went deadly. "Show me. Now." He looked at Blanche. "You stay here. Don't move until I send guards." He left at a run, and Blanche sank onto a stone bench, heart hammering. Genevieve's words echoed in her mind. "How long before you become a liability instead of a curiosity?" Someone wanted her dead. Someone inside the castle, with access to the kitchens, with knowledge of which food went to which chambers. And Blanche had no idea who she could trust anymore, except maybe the Alpha King, whose protection might not be personal at all. The afternoon sun seemed colder now, and the roses smelled like rot. Chapter 5. The Siege and Sacrifice. The War Council assembled at midnight, when the castle lay shrouded in darkness, and only the most loyal guards walked the walls. Blanche stood in the corner of the great hall, wrapped in borrowed furs against the stone chamber's chill. watching as alphas and military commanders gathered around the massive oak table. She shouldn't be here. This was pack business, military strategy, the domain of warriors and leaders. But Caius had insisted, and when the Alpha King insisted, even the most tradition-bound nobles obeyed. The news had come at sunset. 3 pack territories aligned with Alpha Donovan, Lady Genevieve's ambitious cousin, had mobilized their forces. Combined with religious zealots loyal to Padre Oswin, the priest who'd fled the castle after threatening Blanche during his last visit, they'd formed an army sizable enough to lay siege to the castle itself. Their demands were simple: surrender the cursed Omega for trial and execution, or face war. "We hold superior defensive positions," Tobias was saying, pointing to a map spread across the table. "The castle walls have never been breached in 300 years. We have adequate supplies for a prolonged siege, and our archers can pick off anyone foolish enough to approach within range." "They're not fools," growled Commander Felton, a grizzled alpha with more scars than smooth skin. "They've brought siege engines, catapults, battering rams. They mean to break us through attrition if nothing else. Let them try," Caius said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. "I will not surrender an innocent Omega to a mob screaming for blood based on superstition and fear." "She's not exactly innocent, Your Majesty." The speaker was Lord Blackwood, an elderly alpha who controlled significant pack territories in the south. "She carries bloodline magic that threatened the entire system our ancestors fought to establish. Perhaps there's wisdom in the old laws regarding Void Moon Omegas." Blanche felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She wanted to melt into the stone walls, to disappear the way she'd learned to do in Ashenmoor. But something Caius had told her during their training sessions echoed in her mind. Running from judgment doesn't change the verdict. Standing tall in the face of it sometimes does. She stepped forward, into the candlelight. "I understand your fear," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You see me as a threat to everything you know. The historical records say my bloodline could manipulate mate bonds, create rogue pacts, undermine alpha authority, but I've never done any of those things. I don't even know how. I'm just an Omega who couldn't shift until very recently, who's been shown more kindness in this castle than in 22 years among my own people." "Pretty words," Lord Blackwood countered. "But power doesn't require intent to be dangerous. A wildfire doesn't mean to burn down the forest." "Then teach me control," Blanche challenged. "Give me the chance to prove I'm not the monster you fear. Or execute me now and prove you're no better than the villagers who tortured me for entertainment." Silence fell. Then Caius stood, and the weight of his presence filled the hall. "This discussion is concluded," he said flatly. "We defend the castle. We defend Blanche. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to join the siege forces outside." No one moved. Even Lord Blackwood bowed his head in reluctant acceptance. The council dispersed, leaving Blanche alone with Caius in the echoing chamber. She expected him to be angry at her for speaking out, for challenging nobility during a war council. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been pride. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Probably both." Blanche wrapped the furs tighter around herself. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "You didn't." Caius moved to the fireplace, staring into flames that cast dancing shadows across his features. "You spoke truth to people who needed to hear it. Some of them might even remember it when this is over. You think we'll survive? I think we have to." He turned to face her fully. "Blanche, there's something you need to know about why this is happening now. Why the conspiracy has moved so quickly." Dread pooled in her stomach. What did Everard find in the archives? Evidence that the Great Purge 300 years ago wasn't complete. "My ancestor, the first Winterborn king, ordered the extermination of all Void Moon Omegas, but some survived by having their children sealed at birth, their gifts hidden through magic. Those children were scattered among common packs, their true nature dormant. So there could be others," Blanche whispered. "Other sealed Omegas who don't know what they are." "Yes. And if those seals can be broken, if Void Moon Omegas return in significant numbers," Caius's expression was grim, "it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in every pack territory. Alphas like Donovan and traditionalists like Lord Blackwood see that as an existential threat. They want you eliminated before you become a symbol of change. I don't want to be a symbol. Frustration leaked into Blanche's voice. I just want to exist without people trying to kill me for what I was born as. I know. Caius crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The weight of leadership pressing on shoulders that carried an entire kingdom. But sometimes we don't get to choose what we represent to others. We only get to choose how we respond. Blanche looked up at him, at this powerful alpha who'd defended her repeatedly, who'd changed laws and challenged tradition for her sake, who'd never once asked for anything in return. The manuscript Everard found. She said slowly, the one explaining how void moon seals break. It mentioned a true mate bond, freely accepted. Is that why you've been... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the hope that had been growing in her chest, despite every lesson Ashenmore had taught her about not deserving love. Caius's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his palm. I won't lie and say that information wasn't relevant. But Blanche, my wolf recognized you before I knew anything about Void Moon Omegas or sealed powers. The bond I feel toward you isn't strategic. It's instinctive, consuming, and entirely inconvenient given current circumstances. Inconvenient. A laugh bubbled out of her, slightly hysterical. We're under siege by 3 packs who want me dead, and you're calling mate bonds inconvenient. What would you prefer I call it? I don't know. Terrifying? Impossible? The worst timing in the history of shifter romance? His lips quirked into something that might have been a smile if the situation weren't so dire. All accurate descriptions, but also irrelevant. The bond is there whether we acknowledge it or not. Before Blanche could respond, bells began ringing throughout the castle. Not the gentle bells that marked hours or meals, but the deep, resonant warning bells that signaled imminent attack. Caius's entire demeanor shifted from gentle suitor to war leader in a heartbeat. They're moving now. Under cover of darkness, he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. Come with me. You need to be somewhere secure. They ran through corridors filling with armed guards, past servants barricading windows, up spiral staircases to the highest tower. Meredith and Everard waited there, along with supplies, and what looked like ancient texts spread across tables. This is the most defensible position in the castle, Caius explained quickly. Meredith has healing supplies. Everard has been researching the seal-breaking ritual. If the siege goes badly, if they breach the walls, I need you to try. Try what? Blanche asked, though she already knew. The manuscript describes the ritual. Blood, acceptance, a mate bond freely given under duress of survival. His storm-gray eyes held hers. I need you to try breaking your seal. If your powers emerge, you might be able to turn the tide. Weaken their mate bonds, create confusion in their ranks. It's a gamble, but it's the only chance we have if the walls fall. Blanche squared her shoulders. Show me what I need to do. Everard stepped forward with the ancient manuscript, its pages yellowed with age. The ritual requires blood from both parties, mixed with 3 drops of Wolfsbane extract to represent overcoming poison. Words of acceptance must be spoken at the moment of joining. And critically, both parties must be willing. Any coercion or doubt will cause the ritual to fail catastrophically. Catastrophically how? Blanche asked. Death, Meredith said bluntly. The magic consumes the Omega from within if the bond isn't genuine. It's why so few Void Moon Omegas ever achieved their full power historically. Most couldn't find mates who truly accepted them despite the danger their abilities represented. The sound of battering rams hitting the castle gates thundered through the stone walls. Shouts and screams echoed from below as the siege began in earnest. I'll be commanding from the walls, Caius said, already moving toward the door. Tobias will coordinate interior defense. If I send word that we're being overwhelmed, you start the ritual immediately. Don't wait for my return. What if you don't return? The words escaped before Blanche could stop them. Caius paused at the threshold, looking back with an expression that made her chest ache. Then you'll have to find another way to survive. But Blanche? He smiled, and it was fierce and wild and entirely alpha. I'm very hard to kill. He left, and Blanche found herself alone with Meredith, Everard, and the manuscript that might be her salvation or her death. "Tell me about the ritual," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Everything. I need to understand what I'm agreeing to." Everard opened the manuscript to the relevant pages, covered in symbols that seemed to shift when she looked at them directly. The mate bond ritual for Void Moon Omegas is different from standard shifter bonds. It doesn't just join two souls. It creates a channel through which your sealed power can flow safely, using the mate's strength as an anchor to prevent the magic from consuming you. So Caius would be affected too, Blanche realized. He'd share the burden of my power. More than that, Meredith added gently. He'd be vulnerable to anything that harmed you. Your pain would become his pain. Your death would likely kill him as well. The bond that severs Void Moon seals is absolute. There's no reversing it once completed. Blanche sank into a chair, processing the implications. Caius was offering to bind himself irrevocably to her, to share every danger her bloodline represented, to make himself vulnerable in ways no Alpha King should ever be, all to give her the chance to access power she might not even be able to control. "He's insane," she whispered. "He's in love." Meredith corrected quietly. "There's not much difference." Outside the tower windows, Blanche could see flames spreading across the outer courtyard, where siege weapons had launched burning projectiles. She could hear the clash of steel against steel, the screams of wounded, the howls of wolves engaging in battle. Somewhere down there, Caius was fighting to protect her, to protect the kingdom, to defend the right of an Omega with cursed blood to simply exist. And Blanche realized that if the walls fell, if the choice came down to attempting the ritual or letting Caius's sacrifice be for nothing, she'd do it. Not because she understood her power or believed she could control it, but because for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. Freely, completely, without condition. The least she could do was choose him back. "Prepare the ritual components," she told Everard, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "If the signal comes, I don't want to waste time." Everard nodded and began gathering materials. Silver bowls, ceremonial blades, the Wolfsbane extract that would represent her lifelong poisoning, transformed into strength. Meredith moved to her side and took her hand. "Child, you don't have to do this. There might be other ways to—" "There aren't," Blanche interrupted gently. "We both know that. And honestly, I'm tired of being afraid of what I might be. Maybe it's time to find out." The siege raged on into the night, and Blanche waited in the tower, surrounded by ancient magic and impossible choices, ready to become either salvation or destruction. She just hoped she'd live long enough to discover which. Chapter 6. Awakening the Violet Wolf. The ritual began at dawn, when the first rays of light filtered through the tower windows and painted the ancient stone in shades of blood and gold. Outside, the siege had raged for 3 days without pause. The castle walls held, but barely. Sections had crumbled under the relentless pounding of catapults. The eastern gate groaned under repeated strikes from a battering ram that seemed to shake the very foundations of the keep. Caius had sent word an hour before sunrise. They were being overwhelmed. The defenders were exhausted, supplies were dwindling, and Alpha Donovan's forces had breached the outer courtyard. It was time. Now Blanche knelt in the center of the tower room, surrounded by a circle of ancient symbols Everard had painstakingly drawn with silver powder. Meredith had prepared the components. 2 silver bowls, ceremonial blades sharp enough to split moonlight, and the Wolfsbane extract that gleamed like liquid night in its crystal vial. "Once you begin, there's no stopping," Everard warned, his face pale and serious behind his spectacles. "The magic will complete or it will consume. There's no middle ground." "I understand," Blanche said, though her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through bone. The door burst open, and Caius entered, covered in soot and blood and exhaustion. His armor was dented, his face streaked with grime, but his storm-gray eyes were clear and focused entirely on Blanche. "They've broken through the second line of defense," he said without preamble. "Tobias is holding the interior courtyard, but we've lost too many defenders. If we don't turn the tide in the next hour, They'll reach this tower. Then we don't have an hour to waste. Blanche stood, forcing her legs steady despite the fear coursing through her. The ritual. Now. Caius moved to stand opposite her within the circle, and Meredith and Everard retreated to the edges of the room. The healer's hands were clasped tightly, her weathered face lined with worry. The scholar clutched his manuscript, ready to read the words that would either save them or destroy them all. "You're certain?" Caius asked quietly, for her alone. "Blanche, once this bond is formed, I'll share everything with you. Your pain, your power, your very life force. If you die, I die. If the magic consumes you, it consumes me as well. There's no protection for me in this ritual. I know." Blanche reached for his hands, feeling them large and warm and solid in hers. "You've given me protection, safety, the first home I've ever truly had. Let me give you something in return, even if it's terrifying." His fingers tightened around hers. "I need you to know something before we start. My wolf recognized you that first day in Ashenmoor, not because of your bloodline or your power, because you were brave enough to survive when the world wanted you broken, because you have more strength in your smallest finger than most alphas have in their entire bodies. That's what I'm binding myself to, not a void moon omega. You." Tears burned in Blanche's eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for crying later, if they survived. "Begin the ritual," Caius commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Everard opened the manuscript and began to read in a language Blanche didn't recognize, words that felt old and powerful and dangerous. Meredith approached with the ceremonial blades, handing one to each of them. "Blood given freely," Everard intoned, still reading from the ancient text. "Blood shared between souls who choose each other beyond logic, beyond fear, beyond the laws of pack and crown." Blanche drew the blade across her palm, watching crimson well up immediately. The pain was sharp but clean. Caius did the same without hesitation, his larger hand bleeding more profusely. They clasped hands, their blood mingling and dripping into the silver bowl Meredith held beneath them. The moment their blood mixed, Blanche felt something spark between them. A connection, tentative and trembling, reaching across the space that separated self from other. Wolfsbane conquered, Everard continued, and Meredith added 3 drops of the dark extract to their combined blood. The mixture hissed and steamed, releasing a scent that made Blanche's wolf stir for the first time since her partial transformation weeks ago. "Now the words," Everard said urgently. "Repeat after me, both of you together. I bind my soul to yours, freely given. I bind my soul to yours, freely given," they said in unison, their voices overlapping. "I accept your pain as mine, your joy as mine, your life as mine. I accept your pain as mine, your joy as mine, your life as mine. I choose you, in this moment and all moments, until death claims us both. I choose you, in this moment and all moments, until death claims us both." The silver powder circle erupted in violet light. Blanche gasped as power surged through her, not from outside but from within, as if something that had been sleeping her entire life suddenly woke up screaming. The seal that had kept her wolf dormant, that had prevented her transformation, that had protected the world from her bloodline's gifts, shattered like glass. Pain exploded through every nerve in her body. She would have fallen if Caius's hands hadn't held hers in an iron grip, anchoring her to consciousness even as the magic threatened to tear her apart. Through the agony, she felt Caius. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, in ways that defied description. His strength flowed into her, giving her something to hold on to. His wolf howled in triumph, calling to her own, and her wolf answered. The transformation tore through Blanche with violence that should have killed her. Bones broke and reformed, muscles tore and regenerated. Her skin split and healed, until finally fur emerged white as snow, gleaming as if lit from within. But this wasn't like the partial transformation she'd managed before. This was complete, overwhelming, absolute. When the pain finally receded and Blanche could think again, she found herself on 4 paws, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen. Her white fur seemed to glow with its own light, and when she looked at Caius, His reflection shone in violet in her enhanced vision. Moon goddess. Meredith breathed, her voice full of wonder and fear. She's magnificent. Caius had transformed as well, his massive black wolf standing beside her white one. Through the bond that now connected them completely, Blanche could feel his thoughts like they were her own. Mine, his wolf said simply. Mate, pack, forever. Yours, Blanche's wolf agreed, and the rightness of it sang through her bones. But there was more than just the bond awakening. Power surged beneath Blanche's skin, ancient and wild and terrifying. She could sense every shifter in the castle, could feel the threads that connected mates, could perceive the very structure of pack bonds that held society together, and she knew, instinctively, that she could manipulate those threads. An explosion rocked the tower as something heavy struck the castle wall nearby. Screams echoed from below, along with the howls of wolves locked in mortal combat. Caius shifted back to human form, and Blanche did the same, surprised by how easily the transformation came now. They stood facing each other, both naked and vulnerable, and more connected than two beings had any right to be. "Can you feel them?" Caius asked. "The attackers, their bonds." "Yes." Blanche closed her eyes, reaching out with her new senses. She could feel Alpha Donovan's pack, bound to him through traditional hierarchy, could sense the religious fanatics loyal to Padre Oswin, held together by fear and zealotry, could perceive Lady Genevieve somewhere in the army below, her ambitions a bright flame of poisonous desire. "Can you weaken them?" His hand found hers again, and the contact amplified her abilities exponentially. "I think so. But Caius, if I do this, if I start manipulating pack bonds, there's no hiding what I am anymore. Every shifter in the kingdom will know that Void Moon Omegas have returned. The consequences, let them come." His storm-gray eyes blazed with fierce determination. "Right now, all that matters is survival. We'll deal with politics after we're still alive to argue about them." Blanche nodded and reached out with her power. The effect was immediate and devastating. In the courtyard below, wolves who'd been fighting viciously suddenly stumbled, confused, as the bonds connecting them to their alpha wavered and weakened. Mates fighting side by side felt their connections fray, causing panic and disorientation. The organized assault devolved into chaos as soldiers lost their sense of purpose, their connection to pack identity, the fundamental bonds that made them more than just individual predators. Through the mate bond, Caius saw what she saw, felt what she felt. "Focus on Donovan's personal guard," he said urgently, "the ones closest to him. Break those bonds completely. It was harder than weakening them. Breaking pack bonds required precision, force, and a ruthlessness Blanche had never needed before. But she thought of all the years of torture in Ashenmoor, of Jorah's cruelty, of every person who'd called her cursed and worthless. She channeled that pain into power, and shattered the bonds connecting Donovan's elite warriors to their alpha. The results were catastrophic for the attacking forces. 10 of Donovan's strongest wolves collapsed mid-battle, howling in agony as the severed bonds left them directionless, lost, their entire sense of identity torn away. Others fled in panic, unable to maintain formation without the cohesion pack bonds provided. "It's working," Caius breathed, pulling her close. "Keep going. Push them back." Blanche did, wave after wave of power flowing from her through their mate bond and out into the battlefield. She could feel Caius anchoring her, his strength preventing the magic from consuming her the way it would have without him. Alpha Donovan must have realized what was happening, because suddenly Blanche felt his attention snap to her location. Through her enhanced senses, she perceived him rallying his remaining forces, pointing toward the tower where she and Caius stood. "They're coming for us," she said. "Let them try." Caius shifted back into wolf form and positioned himself between Blanche and the door. His message was clear. They'd have to go through him to reach her. More explosions shook the castle. Blanche heard Tobias shouting commands, coordinating the defenders who were now gaining the upper hand as the attackers' cohesion crumbled. But some of Donovan's forces had broken through, were racing up the tower stairs. Blanche transformed as well. her white wolf massive and terrible and glowing with violet light from her eyes. When the door burst open and 5 warriors rushed in, she and Caius met them with violence that was both beautiful and horrifying. The fight was brutal, but brief. Blanche discovered that her power didn't just weaken bonds from a distance. When she made physical contact with an enemy, she could sever their pack connections instantly, leaving them paralyzed with the soul-deep agony of sudden isolation. 3 of the attackers fled when they saw what she could do. The other 2 fell to Caius's jaws, his black wolf a shadow of death protecting its mate with absolute ferocity. When silence fell again, Blanche reverted to human form, breathing hard. Her body was covered in blood, none of it hers. Caius stood beside her, also human again, also painted in the evidence of battle. Through the windows, they could see Donovan's forces retreating in complete disarray. Without the bonds holding them together, without the certainty of pack identity, they'd become just individual wolves fleeing for their lives. The siege was broken, but as Blanche stood there, feeling the full weight of her power for the first time, she realized the real battle was just beginning, because now everyone knew what she could do. Now every pack in the kingdom would have to decide whether to fear her or follow her. And standing beside her, bound to her through blood and magic and choice, was the Alpha King who'd gambled his entire kingdom on a cursed Omega from Ashenmoor. They'd won the day, but the war for the future of shifter society had only just started. Chapter 7. Coronation under protest. The 6 weeks following the siege passed in a blur of political maneuvering, reconstruction, and increasingly tense negotiations. Blanche spent her days learning to control transformations that came more easily now, but still carried the threat of losing herself to instinct. She practiced manipulating pack bonds under Everard's careful guidance, discovering the difference between weakening connections and completely severing them. The latter left permanent scars on the soul that she could sense even weeks later. Nights were reserved for training with Caius, both in combat and in the more subtle arts of court politics. Tobias proved invaluable, teaching her which nobles could be trusted and which smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. Lady Genevieve has been notably silent since the siege, Tobias mentioned one afternoon as they walked through the castle gardens. The roses had bloomed despite the destruction around them, their petals a defiant splash of color against gray stone. Too silent. It makes me nervous. She was in Donovan's camp during the attack, Blanche said, remembering the taste of the ambitious woman's bonds when she'd weakened them. Surely that's treason. Proving it is different from knowing it. Tobias stopped beside a fountain, his expression troubled. She fled before we could capture her. No witnesses willing to testify, no evidence beyond circumstantial connections. Caius could execute her on suspicion alone, but that would make martyrs of her and her faction. So we do nothing. We watch. We wait. We prepare for whatever she's planning next. Tobias glanced at Blanche, his green eyes serious. Which brings me to the real reason I wanted to speak with you privately. Caius is planning to formally name you Luna at the next full moon ceremony, 3 days from now. Blanche's heart stuttered. They'd discussed it, of course. The mate bond made her his Luna by default in the eyes of shifter law. But a formal coronation was different. That was public, irrevocable, a statement that would echo through every pack in the kingdom. He didn't mention a timeline, she said carefully, because he knew you'd panic. Tobias smiled slightly. You're doing it now, actually. Your breathing just changed. Blanche forced herself to take steady breaths. I'm not ready. The nobles barely tolerate my presence. Half the court thinks I'm a threat that should be eliminated. How am I supposed to stand beside Caius as Luna when they see me as an abomination? By standing tall, anyway. Tobias's voice carried surprising gentleness. You've already proven yourself in battle, Blanche. You saved this castle. Saved lives that would have been lost without your intervention. The nobles who matter remember that. And the ones who don't matter will be dealt with if they become problems. The steel beneath Tobias's words reminded Blanche that for all his kindness, the beta was still a warrior who'd killed during the siege without hesitation. Caius won't allow anyone to threaten you. But he also needs you beside him, officially recognized, to stabilize the political situation. The next 3 days passed too quickly. Meredith helped Blanche prepare, teaching her the traditional responses for the Luna coronation ceremony. Everard provided historical context about Void Moon Omegas who'd attempted to integrate into pack society before. Most of those stories ended badly, which did nothing for Blanche's confidence. Caius found her the evening before the ceremony, pacing in the training courtyard and practicing transformations to burn off nervous energy. "You'll wear a path in the stones," he observed, leaning against the archway with his arms crossed. "I can't do this." The words burst out before Blanche could stop them. "Tomorrow, in front of every important alpha in the kingdom, you're going to name me Luna." "Me. The cursed Omega who couldn't shift until 6 weeks ago. They'll laugh, or worse, they'll rebel." Caius pushed off the wall and moved toward her with that predatory grace that still made her pulse quicken. "Let them try. You can't fight everyone who opposes us. Watch me." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his storm-gray eyes. "Blanche, I've spent 8 years as Alpha King making calculated political decisions, compromising, negotiating, playing the Game of Thrones, and it nearly cost me everything that matters. You think I'm going to let fear dictate my choices now, after I've finally found something worth fighting for? I'm not worth a civil war," she whispered. "You're worth tearing down the entire corrupt system if necessary." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "But it won't come to that. Most alphas are pragmatists. They saw what you can do during the siege. They know that having a Void Moon Omega as ally is vastly preferable to having one as enemy. Fear will keep them in line where reason fails. That's a terrible foundation for leadership. It's the only foundation that's ever worked in shifter society." Caius leaned his forehead against hers. "But we're going to change that. Slowly, carefully, but change it we will. Starting with proving that Void Moon Omegas aren't the monsters the old stories claimed." The day of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, the autumn sun painting the castle in shades of gold. Blanche spent the morning being dressed in ceremonial robes by servants who'd once whispered about the cursed creature the Alpha King had rescued. Now they treated her with cautious respect, their fear tempered by genuine loyalty to Caius. The dress itself was magnificent, white silk embroidered with violet thread in patterns that echoed the ancient symbols from the ritual that had broken her seal. A circlet of silver waited on a velvet cushion, set with a single amethyst that matched her eyes. Traditional Luna attire for a very non-traditional Luna. The cathedral was packed when Blanche arrived, every pew filled with nobles, alphas, and important pack members from across the kingdom. She could feel their attention like physical weight, could sense their bonds and allegiances through her enhanced perception. Most were curious. Some were hostile. A concerning number were afraid. Caius waited at the altar, dressed in formal black with the crown of the Alpha King gleaming in his dark hair. When their eyes met across the cathedral, the mate bond pulsed with warmth and certainty. Blanche began the long walk down the aisle. The ceremonial attendants walked ahead of her, but Tobias had positioned himself at her side, his presence a subtle reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Meredith and Everard sat in the front row, their familiar faces anchoring her. The ceremony itself was ancient, words in the old tongue that Everard had helped her memorize. Blanche knelt before Caius as tradition demanded, and he placed the silver circlet on her head with hands that were steady despite the magnitude of what they were doing. "Do you accept the burden of Luna?" Caius asked, his voice carrying through the hushed cathedral. "To lead beside the Alpha King, to protect the pack with your life, to uphold the laws and traditions that bind us together?" "I accept," Blanche said clearly, even though half those traditions had nearly gotten her killed. "Do you swear to place the good of the pack above your own desires, to make decisions that serve all shifters regardless of rank, to be voice for those who cannot speak for themselves?" "I swear it." Caius lifted her to her feet, and for a moment they simply stood facing each other, the weight of history and hope balanced on this single moment. Then the cathedral doors burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Padre Oswin stood in the entrance, flanked by 20 men wearing religious vestments and carrying what looked suspiciously like blessed silver weapons. His face was gaunt and wild, eyes burning with fanatic certainty. "Heresy!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Blasphemy against the moon goddess herself! You dare crown this demon, this abomination, as Luna? I will not allow it." Guards moved to intercept, but Oswin and his zealots charged forward with supernatural speed. Blanche realized too late that they'd taken Wolfsbane themselves, the poison temporarily enhancing their speed at the cost of eventual death. They were suicide attackers, and they were headed straight for her. Caius moved to intercept, but one of the zealots threw a lance of blessed silver toward Blanche. She watched it arc through the air, knowing she couldn't dodge in time, knowing it would hit her chest and probably kill her. Caius shifted mid-leap, his black wolf taking 3 of the silver lances meant for Blanche. He crashed to the marble floor, blood spreading beneath him in a pool that seemed to grow with terrifying speed. The mate bond screamed with his pain, and something inside Blanche snapped. She shifted. Not carefully, not with the control she'd been practicing. Raw, primal, absolute. Her white wolf erupted from her human form, larger than before, glowing with violet light that filled the entire cathedral. Oswin and his zealots froze, staring at her in horror. Good. Let them see what they'd awakened. Blanche's wolf tore through them with violence that would haunt her later. She didn't just fight, she destroyed, channeling all her rage and fear and love for the wounded mate bleeding on the floor behind her. Her jaws closed around Oswin's throat, and she ripped it out without mercy or hesitation. The taste of blood filled her mouth, and her wolf wanted more, wanted to tear apart everyone who dared threaten their mate. Guards had joined the fight now, overwhelming the remaining zealots. But Blanche barely noticed. She stood over Oswin's corpse, covered in blood and shaking with adrenaline, while nobles pressed themselves against the walls in terror. Then Caius's pain through the bond brought her back to herself. She shifted to human form, naked and bloody, and fell to her knees beside him. He'd shifted back as well, 3 silver lance wounds bleeding freely across his chest and shoulder. "Meredith!" Blanche screamed, her hands hovering over the wounds uselessly. "Someone get Meredith! Here, child, move aside." The healer appeared with her supplies, Tobias carrying her bag. "Those lances were blessed. The wounds won't heal naturally. We need to extract the silver and purify the damage. Let me help." Blanche placed her hands over the worst wound, the one closest to Caius's heart. Through the mate bond, she could feel his pain, his weakness, the silver poison spreading through his system. She'd never tried to heal before, had always focused on the destructive aspects of her power. But now, desperate and terrified of losing him, Blanche reached for something different. She thought about the mate bond, about how it connected their life forces. If she could share his pain, maybe she could share her strength as well. Power flowed from her into Caius, violet light surrounding her hands. She felt his wolf respond, felt the silver poison being pushed back by her void moon magic. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. The wounds began to close, not completely but faster than they should have. When Blanche finally pulled her hands away, exhausted, Caius's eyes opened. Gray met Violet in perfect understanding. "You saved me," he rasped. "You took those lances for me." Blanche's voice cracked. "Don't ever do that again." "Can't promise that." He managed a weak smile. "Protecting you is kind of my job." Around them, the cathedral had descended into chaos. Nobles arguing, guards clearing bodies, blood staining holy ground. But Tobias was already taking control, his voice cutting through the confusion with commands that got people moving. Blanche looked down at herself, naked and covered in Oswin's blood, and realized she'd just killed a priest in front of the entire court. She'd lost control, given in to her wolf's rage, proven everyone's worst fears about void moon omegas. "They'll use this against us," she whispered to Caius. "They'll say I'm dangerous, unstable, exactly the threat they feared. Let them." Caius sat up slowly, refusing Meredith's protests. He pulled Blanche against him, uncaring of the blood and mess. "You defended your mate. That's not only acceptable in shifter culture, it's celebrated. And any alpha who criticizes you for it will have to explain why they think protecting your bonded partner is wrong." Tobias approached, his expression grim. "We need to move both of you to secure chambers." The remaining zealots fled, but there could be more sympathizers in the crowd. "The ceremony," Blanche protested weakly. "We didn't finish the coronation." "Yes, we did." Caius touched the silver circlet still miraculously perched on her blood-matted hair. "You're Luna, Blanche. Formally, officially, and violently. I doubt anyone here will ever forget it." As guards helped them from the cathedral, Blanche caught glimpses of the nobles' faces. Fear, yes, but also awe, respect, and in some cases, genuine approval. She'd proven herself in the most primal way possible by defending her mate without hesitation. She was Luna now, crowned in blood and violence. And somehow, that felt more honest than any peaceful ceremony could have been. Chapter 8. Luna of the New Era. 3 days after the cathedral attack, Blanche stood in Caius's private study while Everard carefully laid out the final manuscripts he'd uncovered. The room smelled of old paper and beeswax candles, and through the window she could see workers repairing the damage from the siege. Life went on, even after violence tried to tear it apart. "These are the original records," Everard said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Unedited, uncensored, exactly as they were written 300 years ago during the Great Purge." Caius stood beside Blanche, one hand resting on her lower back. The casual touch grounded her, reminded her she wasn't facing this alone. Tobias leaned against the door, arms crossed, his expression grim. "The first Winterborn Alpha King didn't just order the extermination of Void Moon Omegas," Everard continued, opening the manuscripts to reveal pages of meticulous records. "He documented it. Names, locations, methods of execution. He wanted future generations to know exactly what he'd done and why." "Why?" Blanche asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Because Void Moon Omegas represented an alternative to the Alpha-dominated hierarchy he was building. They could create independent pacts, could weaken or sever the bonds that gave Alphas their power. Most critically, they could choose who led them, rather than being bound by bloodline and strength alone." Everard's finger traced a passage written in faded ink. He saw them as existential threats to the order he was establishing. So he eliminated them. All of them. Or so he thought. Some survived by having their children sealed. Caius said quietly. "Hidden among common packs. Their gifts dormant." "Yes. And now one of those descendants stands as Luna beside the Alpha King who descends from the man who ordered her ancestors' genocide." Everard looked up, his expression troubled. "The political implications are staggering. Every pack that opposed your coronation will use this against you. They'll say history is repeating itself, that Void Moon Omegas will destroy the system our society is built on. Let them say it." Blanche moved to the window, watching workers rebuild. "They're not entirely wrong. The system is broken, Everard. It's built on violence and suppression, and the assumption that alphas are naturally superior to everyone else. Maybe it does need to be destroyed. Careful," Tobias warned. "That kind of talk is exactly what the traditionalists fear. They'll paint you as a revolutionary threatening everything they value. I am threatening everything they value." Blanche turned to face them. "I exist. That alone challenges 3 centuries of lies about Void Moon Omegas being extinct. Every day I use my abilities without destroying pack bonds or creating chaos proves their justifications for the genocide were false. My very presence is revolutionary whether I intend it or not." Caius pulled her close, and she felt his pride through their bond. "Then we use that. We make you a symbol of change rather than letting our enemies make you a symbol of fear." "How?" Blanche asked. "By finishing what we started at your coronation." Caius's expression was determined. "We don't just acknowledge what my ancestor did. We condemn it publicly. We declare the Great Purge a crime against shifter kind. We actively search for other sealed Omegas and offer them sanctuary, education, the chance to awaken their gifts safely." "That's insanity," Tobias protested. "You'd be admitting royal culpability for genocide. The political fallout alone could destabilize the entire kingdom." "The kingdom is already unstable," Caius countered. "We just fought off a siege by 3 packs who wanted Blanche dead, specifically because she represents change they fear. That's not stability. That's a powder keg waiting to explode. We can either pretend everything is fine and wait for the next attack, or we can take control of the narrative and force real reform." "If we do this," Everard said slowly, If we officially acknowledge the genocide and search for survivors, we'll make enemies of every traditionalist alpha in the kingdom. Lord Blackwood alone controls enough territory to cause serious problems. Then we'll deal with him. Caius's voice carried absolute certainty. I've spent 8 years playing political games, Everard. Compromising, negotiating, maintaining the status quo. And all it got me was a kingdom where someone like Blanche gets tortured in a market square while an entire village watches and does nothing. I'm done compromising with people who think that's acceptable. Blanche felt something shift in her chest. A deep recognition that this was the moment everything changed. Not the ritual that broke her seal, not the siege, not even the violent coronation. This moment, when Caius chose truth over political convenience, when he decided to tear down the system his family had built rather than maintain it at her expense. There's something else in the manuscripts, Everard said hesitantly. Something you need to know before you make this decision. What? Blanche asked. The Void Moon Omegas weren't just killed during the Purge. They were tortured first, their powers studied and documented. The first Winterborn king wanted to understand their abilities before eliminating them. These records describe experiments conducted on children. Blanche. Experiments designed to find the limits of their power and the most efficient ways to kill them. Blanche's hands clenched into fists. He experimented on children. He justified it by claiming they were too dangerous to exist, that understanding their powers was necessary to prevent future threats. But yes, the records describe systematic torture of Void Moon Omega children, some as young as 5 years old. Everard's voice shook. The details are horrific. I've been a scholar for 30 years, and I've never read anything that made me physically ill until I found these manuscripts. The room fell silent. Blanche could feel Caius's rage through their bond, mirroring her own. But beneath the rage was something else. Grief. Deep, soul-crushing grief for children who died 300 years ago, but whose suffering was documented in meticulous clinical detail. I want those records published, Blanche said finally. Every page, every detail, every atrocity. I want the entire kingdom to know exactly what the so-called glorious first Winterborn king did to establish his dynasty. Blanche, Tobias said carefully, are you certain? Once that information is public, there's no taking it back. Caius will be judged by his ancestors' actions, whether it's fair or not. The crown's legitimacy will be questioned. Good. Blanche moved to stand beside Caius, taking his hand. Let it be questioned. Let every alpha who benefits from this system have to face the truth of how it was built. Let them decide if maintaining power is worth defending genocide. You understand what you're asking, Caius said, looking down at her with those storm-gray eyes. If we do this, we're declaring war on the old order, not with armies, but with truth. And that might be more dangerous. I understand. Blanche squeezed his hand. But I also understand that I spent 22 years being called cursed and worthless because people needed a scapegoat for their own failures. Those Void Moon Omega children died for the same reason, because they threatened people who valued power over justice. I won't let their deaths be forgotten. I won't let the lies continue. Caius turned to Everard. Prepare copies of all the manuscripts. I want them distributed to every major pact territory, every noble house, every place where decisions about our kingdom's future are made. Include a formal statement from the crown acknowledging what was done and condemning it without reservation. Your Majesty, Everard said slowly, are you certain about this? Once you acknowledge royal responsibility for the genocide, you're giving your enemies ammunition. They'll use it against you. They already have ammunition. Caius's expression was resolved. They have 3 centuries of lies and propaganda. What I'm giving them is truth. Let's see which proves more powerful. As Everard left to begin the massive task of copying and distributing the manuscripts, Tobias approached Caius with unusual hesitancy. I need to know, is this about justice, or is this about her? Caius didn't hesitate. Both. I love her, Tobias. More than I thought possible to love anyone. But even if I didn't, this would still be the right thing to do. Those children deserved better than to be experimented on and murdered because they threatened an alpha's ambitions. And shifter society deserves better than to be built on lies and genocide. Tobias nodded slowly, then surprised them both by kneeling formally before Blanche. Then as Beta, I pledge myself to your service, Luna. Whatever comes next, you have my loyalty. Stand up, Blanche said, embarrassed. You don't need to kneel to me. Yes, I do. Tobias rose, his green eyes serious. Because you're going to change everything, and someone needs to make sure you survive long enough to do it. Over the next 2 weeks, copies of the manuscripts spread across the kingdom. The reactions ranged from outrage to vindication, to calls for Caius's abdication. Lord Blackwood led a delegation of traditionalist alphas demanding the crown distance itself from Blanche, and reaffirmed traditional pack hierarchy. Caius refused, and 3 pack territories threatened to withhold tribute payments. But something unexpected happened as well. Letters began arriving from across the kingdom. Omegas who'd always felt different, whose parents had died young under mysterious circumstances, who'd been told they were weak or defective. Some described symptoms that matched the documented effects of ancestral sealing. Others simply wanted to know if there might be an explanation for their struggles beyond personal failure. We're finding them, Meredith said, sorting through the letters in Blanche's chambers. Other sealed void moon omegas. Dozens of them, scattered across every pack territory in the kingdom. Blanche read through several letters, her heart aching. These could have been her words, her pain, her confusion. What do? We offer them what you were given, Caius said from the doorway. Safety, education, the chance to understand themselves without fear. We establish a formal program to identify sealed omegas and help them awaken their gifts safely. The traditionalists will see that as building an army, Tobias warned. Let them. Caius moved to stand beside Blanche, reading over her shoulder. We're not building an army. We're righting an injustice 3 centuries in the making. If they choose to see that as a threat, that says more about them than us. Another letter caught Blanche's attention. This one came from a young Omega in the Southern Territories, who described being unable to shift, but responding to Wolfsbane. She'd tried to take her own life twice, convinced she was too broken to deserve existence. Only the recent news about Blanche had stopped her from trying again. I need to meet them, Blanche said suddenly. All of them. Everyone who writes to us seeking help. I need them to know they're not alone, not broken, not cursed. I need them to see that there's hope. That's dangerous, Tobias protested. Travel makes you vulnerable, and some of these letters could be traps set by people who want you dead. Everything I do makes me vulnerable. Blanche stood, clutching the letter. I could hide here in the castle forever and still be a target. At least if I'm visible, if I'm actively helping people understand what Void Moon Omegas truly are. I'm changing the narrative. I'm proving we're not the monsters the old stories claimed. Caius studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We'll organize a tour. Heavily guarded, carefully planned, visiting pack territories where we've received letters. You'll meet with sealed Omegas, offer education and support, and you'll do it publicly, so everyone can see that Void Moon Omegas aren't destroyers. We're healers, teachers, bridges between divided communities. You're taking a massive risk, Tobias said flatly. We've been taking massive risks since the moment Caius brought me to this castle, Blanche replied. This is just the next one. As they began planning the tour, Blanche found herself staring out the window at the kingdom she'd never expected to belong to. Somewhere out there were others like her. Other sealed Omegas who'd spent their lives thinking they were worthless. And now she had the chance to show them the truth. She was Luna, crowned in blood, and bound to an Alpha King who'd chosen truth over tradition. Together, they were going to tear down 3 centuries of lies and rebuild something better in its place. It wouldn't be easy. It might not even be possible. But for the first time in her 22 years, Blanche believed she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And if changing the world meant making enemies of those who profited from injustice, so be it. She'd survived Ashenmoor's cruelty, Jorah's torture, assassination attempts, and a siege. She could survive politics too. Besides, she had something the traditionalists didn't. Hope. And sometimes that was the most dangerous weapon of all.